out.
Done.
All
Where's
right, guys.
Brendan? He's disappeared.
Well, it might be an intimate group tonight, which is that's fine. That's
Hey,
nice.
that's when you play street sports, it's the group. Sometimes it gets intimate, and sometimes it's so big that it's next week you can be sure that it's going to be intimate because it wasn't as much fun. I've noticed that with street sport, it has like seasonal. If it grows too big, it dies, and then when it dies, it can be regenerated again. But the players who stick in there, they get something out of that process. It's like a tapering effect. It was getting really hard, and then it backs off a bit. It's especially when the kids really love it, they always come back next week. But that just compounds it, and sometimes it just gets not enough game, and then all of a sudden, okay, I'm not going to go this week, and we get left with a different group. And yeah, you don't get that in such a constrained environment. You don't get that diversity of influence week in, week out. It's a constant flow of the same people all the time, and that's just in ecological dynamics, that's a recipe for disaster. That's a pandemic. That's that's rot going through a crop, just because it can, because there's nothing in between. It's just all the same. Yeah. Hey, okay. Too much gold.
You're on fire, mate.
Oh, wow.
Fire.
Come on. Bring it on.
Go, boy.
Yeah,
That's the thing. That's without having choice, obviously, too. So people need to be committed.
Yeah.
You have to be there, and then people get judged if you're not there.
Yeah. It's just it's overly constrained. Yeah.
That's it. Well, we do have another player who's come on. Azif,
So
how are you, son?
Yes,
Join
yes.
us on camera today. You're going to say you're on microphone.
How you guys doing? Hello?
Good.
Hello,
Yeah, I can
what's
hear you
going
now.
on? Are you playing?
Yeah.
What are you playing? What have you been playing lately?
Not a lot. I'm just trying to catch up with what Matty was saying there. No, he just launched straight into it. Keep going, Matty. We're just saying that it might be a small group tonight, as if, but that's some of the gold is, sometimes it'll be a small group, sometimes a large, but you just don't ever know.
Even on a given night, I notice when you're playing street soccer, once a subset of kids gets tired, it's like they all go and get a drink together. Like I've noticed when the big boys go, especially if the super cool big boy goes, his mob goes with him. But then I just noticed that all these little kids start coming from everywhere, and then they start playing. But then when the big boys come back, they might go off and do something else. But like you showed in your presentation the other day, there's something else for them to go and do and come back. And they pick up on that trend too, like when the game's on, when it's off, when's my turn, when's not my turn. And again, we're denying that in these overly structured environments. If you don't like it, what you gonna do? You're really constrained by the environment. There is maybe not another choice, particularly, and that's maybe that environment where it's an enriched environment, it has diversity in it, and our sports specialization model denies that, especially if we look at the sampling years. So anything up to 13, if we consider that you should be sampling in that time and you don't have an affordance to sample at an event, then, maybe we're just denying it purely because the environment is not set up for it, not because anybody chooses otherwise. It's just, you're constrained, play this or nothing, But so the choice is massive, and I'm not sure how you could achieve it. The clubs would have to buy into that when we look at, because that's what happens in street soccer. But this again, it's not that. Like Brendan says, you can't just change things. You have to work within some of the boundaries you might have already established, because things turn slower, infrastructure turns slower than ideas. Maybe. Sorry, JP.
Yeah, no, I want to keep going on this, mate, because I want to flesh out how we can actually bring this to life. Like if we're in overly constrained environments, whether that's organised sport or, school or whatever situation we're in, how do we then lessen that? And, to do something like this value in sampling, I mean, I'm trying to find ways, and that's why I love the GPL futsal, because it's, come and play futsal, but, there'll be different balls there. There'll be the egg balls there. There's skateboards there. So all of a sudden, it becomes accessible. If you say to a club, sampling is really important. The sense of multi-sport's really important. So you can actually offer that when your own club by just actually bringing a different shaped ball, or you get the kids to bring their own ball. I mean, most sporting organisations are providing their own balls, which are usually the same ones. They have 10, 20 balls of the same. Rather than, you might only have one or two. I take, a bag full of different balls, but I only have about, a handful of the match balls that we play with. So for futsal, I'll just have the futsal balls. And then the kids will actually bring their own ball. And then you have this variety all of a sudden of balls. And then they start appreciating that sense of sampling. And it's just with that small example that you can start influencing.
The idea in mind is, you referenced the professor of play, Dr. Gray.
I
cannot even say his name without saying professor of play. And but I think we have to go so far into the definition of play. So when he gave that article, one of the defining characteristics of play is that you can quit at any time, and if I go to your football club and I say, can these kids quit at any time here? They have to say no. And just by that, it's an acknowledgement that it's not play. At some level, there's a trade-off, and maybe the trade-off is justifiable. Don't get me wrong, because maybe they just want to do football, and that's okay. But if they don't have that choice, then I think, like when we look at Ken, like when we tie back into the Salisbury Rovers approach, where they really want to get political about it, have a representation in a legal sense, about children's rights, because they don't always know what's right. And as advocates for play, it's a case of, is it play? And I think there's too many examples of environments where there's no play is not actually there. You cannot, by definition, maybe, and maybe it's a way to sell it as well, because you're saying, well, would you like to increase the amount of play that's here? And I think maybe that's a better approach, because the actual value of play is maybe undervalued, because again, it's not clearly defined enough. There's so much missing.
Yeah, you're making a lot of good points, because I'm just planning for a presentation for coaches in a club I'm working with. And I thought I would sort of get into the self-determination theory and things like that. And when you're talking about autonomy, and I was thinking, okay, so so one part of that I'm doing is basically, okay, let's define play. I mean, here's a club, this is a junior club. What is play for you? What does it mean? What does it mean for you? And then I did take the note and I reviewed Professor Gray today on a video, and found out and it'd be interesting actually to speak to coaches about this too. And I asked them, okay, with your training, so is this self-chosen and self-directed play? Is it intrinsically reinforced? Do they enjoy it? Do they come back? Are they structured by the child or the group? So, which is very seldom. And does it involve imagination? And it can't be an imagination if they're instructed all the time on what to do and when to pass and on how to do things. So there's a lot of points, I think, there, which then leads to perhaps a little bit different thinking about, okay, how can we set up the same environment, the same outcome, but to do it facilitated in such a way that we start perhaps asking questions instead of directing them. And if they need to pass through certain sets of cone, well, okay, the goal is to everybody have to pass the ball, and then in the end, it's just shoot a goal. Let them decide on which order they're going to pass it, which foot they're going to use, and outside, inside, and all of this.
If I may, you made the good comment on Joey's Woman Online webinar, and particularly around that maybe we look at that 13 age group up, and what you're saying there, I think there's also a good distinction to be made in regards to what type of play. So like I was pulling you up a little bit, like just as a joke, because you have this differentiation between deliberate practice and deliberate play, and they have essentially different characteristics. However, deliberate play is still very contextual. So if you're doing football, it doesn't have to be spontaneous play. So you don't have to maybe allow for spontaneous, but you still have to set the conditions where play can exist. So it doesn't have to be, when you even self-directed, it's maybe what do you want to do next week, or what do you want to do tomorrow? So there's not because they're 13, they can take that, they still have that direction, but maybe not in as much spontaneous and more deliberate, which allows that structure to still exist. A football club that needs an identity of football. I think what Joey scares, Joey, I think what people are scared of, not Joey scares, but when Joey, it's like they can't imagine that play would work in their environment when it's presented like as traditionally what we might think play is, where it's, a little bit free for all, where it doesn't have to be, but play has to be defined better than that.
I think there's actually an interesting kind of parallel. So Ken's brought his mug, which says, "I love dance." And I've recently been working in a non-profit youth organization, which brings young people on through dance, particularly. But one thing I thought was quite problematic was the fact that, verbalizing it, we're trying to build expression in the children while doing very, very strict sort of technique work and very strict routine, routines for performances and for production. So that sense, we tried to maybe, especially for the really small age group, say they don't have to stick with a really particular strict style for a term. Why can't they kind of, do one style for 1 week, try another style for another week, and just really open up their minds to the possibilities, which then will kind of build the expression. So I think it's kind of interesting how it goes across not just like that sporting context, but also just like through the expressive arts too. Just moving away from the strict routine and the strict application of how you're supposed to move.
I think you make a great point, because it's at the end, it's still play is involved in skill acquisition. And as you mentioned, that's the importance is not just in games, but also in movement, and maybe movement more so, given that games are maybe an extension of movement, and movement is the primary sort of, vehicle for action. But I agree with that. I lost the gallery view. Sorry guys, what am I doing wrong?
I just said, mate, just tap on your phone and you should be able to get the options. You should be able to control your own view.
All right. Sorry. Go ahead. I'm just going to play with the settings.
I just shared the, I don't know if it's coming up.
Yeah,
I just shared the reference of the definitions of play. But I also actually wanted to, what you say, play is in skill acquisition. I was wondering if you guys, I'm beginning to use the term more skill adaptation as opposed to skill acquisition. I'm not sure if you're interested in that, but that seems to be, the term skill acquisition has been questioned recently, actually, by some of the ecological dynamics crew. Keith Davids recently promoted this use of skill adaptation, that it is in fact, and I like that, because the sense of adapting then promotes that it's going to have different expressions, it's going to be variations, and it's actually adapting to, whether it's a different ball, whether it's a different sport, whether it's a different game, it's the ability to adapt that then actually promotes and develops and nurtures skill, as opposed to when you say acquisition, it's that sense of I'm acquiring something, I've got it, which actually goes against the sense of that ecological dynamic relationship of, one day, or non-linear approach, if you like. One day I'm really skillful and the next day I'm really totally clumsy, and the fact that it's dynamic as opposed to being acquired. I'm wondering if you guys, has anyone heard of those two terms? I feel like skill adaptation fits more. Has anyone else heard that?
Joey, I heard it when I interviewed you on the podcast. and you gave a really good understanding of that, definitely in what you've just done. So I hadn't heard of that before, no.
No, neither have I, but it makes a lot of sense.
Oh, cool. Well, so if I say skill adaptation, you know what I mean then. I think it's more fitting.
I think it's perfect. It actually sounds so, so completely, opposite to what we're looking at, because it's a life sort of framing of like what actually happens in life. You've got to constantly adapt to all these different constraints, all these different, the nuances of the way people interact with each other. So that's how it's, I think when you say adaptation, there's more growth.
So can I just throw a curveball in here?
I'm stuck on your screen. I can only see Joey's screen.
Get rid of it.
Sorry, guys.
Hello, I'm
that's
here.
So much better. Thank you. Whatever Joey did, just fixed it. All I could see was Joey's screen.
Stop sharing.
No, honestly, I felt so isolated. I couldn't even follow you guys talking because I just couldn't see your faces, and I felt like, and I just got lost. I was in Joey's.
Was that you?
Yeah.
Was that you writing help?
Yeah. I just.
You didn't feel like you belong anywhere.
Yeah, honestly, Brendan, I'm looking for buttons. I ran out of options. Whatever Joey did fixed it. So.
Well, she stopped sharing her screen, so.
All right, perfect.
Yeah. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, so the curveball is, like when we're talking about kids playing and everything, do we have to analyze everything though? Like, do we have to have words like skill acquisition and skill adaptation? Is it like what is the real purpose of it? If we want children to play, we can observe and they enjoy themselves, they're learning, and what do we want to impose on them?
Well, I think that's where you look at the idea of guided discovery. So we can offer them as a guide. So, for example, like what's known about football is there's a really rich set of, analysis that's occurred. So you can get a really good understanding of football just academically through your own experience, from a range of sources. So, and that may be enough to be able to create. So that's where the constraints-led approach is, where I might set up an environment where a concept can be appreciated or emphasized. And I think I was thinking the other day that's why multi-sport's beneficial, because we want them to learn how to differentiate concepts, particularly as they relate to movement and skill and games, and the ability to act. Really, it's just action, and action is a movement. So you have to be able to move with discrimination. Like you have to be able to choose appropriately. But so if you do something in tennis, the same concept might be in football, but at a lower emphasis. Whereas if you play tennis for 6 months, you'll be exposed to this concept, which you can still draw from in football. And I sent this clip to Joey. I'll see if I can find it, Joey, with the, the snowmobile. It's just this idea that if you can have a concept and break it down, you can regenerate something new, and it's just part of, I think, why we would want them to learn. So I think, sorry, to get to your point, Ken, is guided discovery is when we're looking at, so if you want to learn football, so if you watch them play and you think, well, they don't understand this concept, or some do, some don't, or this person would benefit, if that's the right way maybe to frame it, or even what do they want to learn out of the game? And I really like the idea that if they're a better player, they'll have more fun. That's the other side of it. And you want to be able to give them environments that do that. So 2v2, for example, will give you more than if you did the same group of kids 6v6. You'd let them play in 2v2 because it's going to give them something more than 6v6. So that's why we get involved, I think, more than anything, is to be the guide. Just to answer your question, I think,
it's good.
I like that, Ken, though. It's like you're being a protector of play right now. You're saying, come on, if it's about the means, let's forget about the end, which we do get wrapped up in.
Sometimes I just ask questions completely opposite to be get the discussion going, and sometimes it takes a different direction. So,
but I think your point is great, Ken, because I think someone mentioned it the other day. It's the wisdom aspect is a whole nother thing. It's that serenity prayer. It's grant me to wisdom to know the difference. And I remember playing street soccer one night, and I'll never forget this example because I sort of predicted it, and for that I got a sense of value. And we're playing street soccer at the PCYC, and it was really uneven. So the big kids are like 3 on one side and there was like 8 on the other. and this mum come over and she wanted to get involved and just play, which was fine. And then she saw the inequality and she wanted to fix it. Her first thing is, we need to make this fair. And I said, no, don't worry about it. And sure enough, 10 minutes later, they changed. The kids, I'm going on that team now. They did it themselves when they were ready. And, you know, but that's what I think what you're getting at to some degree is that intervention, and that as thinking that we're helping, we do need to have such a clarity around what is play, because if not, we can intervene at the wrong time with all the best intentions. However, without a clear definition, it's not play anymore. You know, we've gone too far.
And we should never really intervene either, should we? We should get the opportunities when asked, or when there are signs that yes, we like to get the guidance and so forth. But I mean, I know this from the girls where I coach in volleyball, right? And in the beginning, they were literally, I said, okay, what do you want to do now? You tell us. And I said, no, I want you to work out what you want to do. And it took them a good 3-4 months. But then now I haven't got any say at all, because now they have decided what they want to do, which I think is fantastic. Right? So then you become a true facilitator. And then they start asking me, I need to improve my serve, or I need to do this. Well, then you got something that they want to do. So they are fully intrinsically motivated to learn more.
I like what you're saying too, Ken. Sorry, I was just going to add about the self-determined environment that you mentioned, with the theory of, obviously we were hoping for autonomy, relatedness, and that sense of, you know, it's got to be social for them as well, but also the sense of competency then comes in. So that's where I feel like the skill adaptation, if we can enhance the game for them to feel that competencies, but if we can give them again that choice of, well, sometimes they might want to, if we think of the small-sided games as an example of, you know, that's how you would enhance that skill adaptation to have more of a 2v2s, like Maddie said, as opposed to a big game. But if you say that choice of, do you guys want to play small games or do you want to play one big game? Usually, if they end up saying one big game, for me, that shows that they actually want more of that social interaction. I mean, which it can still happen in small-sided games. But for me, it's interesting to even just that two choices. Do you want to play one big game or do you want to play some small-sided games? It can sometimes tell you why the players are there. Are they there more for social and relatedness, or are they there for a bit more of that feeling that I want to improve and that competencies? And then within that, you're giving them the autonomy to choose, or it might be different on any given day. It's not, you know, we shouldn't necessarily read into, you know, one-off decisions either. But I just love that question, Ken, because you made me think again, like, oh my goodness, I'm getting a bit too serious focusing on skill adaptation. But you know, that's usually what all of us coaches usually focus on. Forget about the autonomy and the importance of relatedness to nurture this intrinsic motivation. Sorry, Brendan, did you want to?
Yeah, it'd be really interesting maybe for Ken to share, I guess, his experience of that journey. I mean, you mentioned, you know, 2 or 3 months to get them to be a little bit more self-reliant in the process. So I guess from starting that in your mindset, and then how that changed, and also particularly even how what you've seen change amongst the dynamics of the group in that process. So can you tell us a bit more about how that all went?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I can tell you that I have the benefit of starting with a clean slate. I may have 10 years of coaching experience, but that was a coach a couple of years, 10 years ago, and then I didn't coach for a long while. I was just following my kids, really. But the interesting was that I actually started to, and this is why I started Yellow for Yelling, because I was taking all these photographs, and that led me to all these, a new world for me to learn how. I never heard of self-determination theory. There's a CLA, all of this, I never heard of it. But then I learned. So when I started to coach the girls, that was my prime focus. I played volleyball many years ago, and for a bit of fun, really play volleyball. But I never coached volleyball or anything like that. But the reason why I started was my daughter played in the club, and she played the season, did really well. And then when the next season was about to start, I asked her, so are you playing volleyball again? I said, no, I don't think so. I said, why is that? It's so serious all the time. I just want to play. So I told her, okay, why don't you get a group of friends together and I coach you? So she did. And then I went to the club and said, hey, I know that your policy is that you have to train to play, but I got a whole team here. I don't know what's going to stick at the end of the season. But if we can go on the conditions of what my girls want, can they join the club? So that's what we did. So I said, so the first training comes up around, and I said to the girls, hey, I got a ball in the court. Do you want to have some fun? And they said, oh, yeah. So I didn't say, oh, we got training starting on Thursday at 6 p.m., be there 1:45, and make sure you're not late because we are busy. We haven't got that much time. I just said, hey, got a couple of balls. Let's come down. There'll be another team on the other side. So who knows what's going to happen, but we're going to have some fun anyway with your friends. And that's exactly what happened. And that's what I allowed continue to happen, even though I did have coaches telling me, oh, you know, you should have a bit of technique there. And said, well, let's get them in warm. And these are friends from school, from them. Some of them have actually been in the same kindergarten. So they are really socializing with friends. So there's a big social gathering. But they are used to, they were all very sporty girls, and a lot of them some of them had played on, and one ending up in the playing for the state team, being selected as a 15-year-old and things like that. So they were good players, you know, but there was a mixed variety, but it was always inclusive, very inclusive all the time. It was not about who's best. And then I started to devise sort of games for them. So a little bit like a video games, you know, you can move levels. So I said, okay, you set your goals. You set how many serves can you do in a row? You set your goal. How many spikes? How many this? How many that? So, and then we just play. And then during a whole session, they started counting. They want to do more serves, and I got this. Okay, so but they set the goals. Okay, I can do 5, and some said I'll do 23. You know, like, and I said, okay, cool, do that. Did you make it? No, I said, no. Okay, do you want to adjust it? No, I'm gonna go with this. And then in the end, hey, I could move up one level. And then they all start talking about levels. And then when is the training? So I mean, I just facilitated for them, and that's what I love about GPL. This is all about facilitate for their needs, and that's what I practice. I practice what I thought made sense of everything I read, everything I heard, and I'm a podcast junkie and everything like that. All I do is just listen to podcasts, and that's just exactly how I do it. And I notice now that there are some in other coaches that sort of, oh, actually the girls, they almost went to the finals and playing under 17s. And I had a 13-year-old, several 14-year-old, and a few 15-year-olds. And they did really well, but I never, ever pushed them or pressured them. I let them run their own team talks. And for the girls that talks too much, I put my stopwatch. I said, okay, you get 20 seconds to say what you want to say. So constraints-led approach. So yeah, so that's what's happened.
Great story. What were the benefits of you, like for you as a coach in that? Like what do you feel were the benefits? Stress-free.
I didn't have to constantly look at someone who make a mistake. I just encourage when they do things wrong or do things right. And I said, and I asking questions. So it's very stress-free. I have to learn to be a lot more observant. I have to learn more about the girls, on how some of them you pat on the back, some of them you go a bit harsher on to, hey, you can do better. Some of them you just laugh with. Some of them you do a TikTok dance with. I mean, it's whatever goes. It's not really. And I learned that you really need to understand who you're coaching. That's really number. And I think volleyball is a great thing because it's only 8-9 girls, so it's like soccer or footy or something like that. When it's like 15, 20 in a group, it's just going to take longer, but you still have, I believe, you still have to do it, and everything I read. So I guess I'm very, very lucky because my starting point is all the theories of the newer, I guess the sort of a newer way of coaching and more player-centered. I think it was Gunny, I don't know if you know Gunny, Craig Gunn, and when I told him the story about what I do with the girls, he said, "Oh, that's self-determination theory." And I said, "What's that?" I didn't know what it was, but to me, it just made sense. So now I started to really look into what is it, and now I understand it. And so now I want to tell coaches about it. I want to explain, okay, how do you do your session? I'm not telling you what to do in terms of your techniques or whatever you want to do I'm not going to tell you how to coach it, but hey, how about thinking about some of these things?
And sorry to I knew a really good story. What sort of feedback did you get from within the club or within the parents or from within the players?
Well, players loved it. They loved it. There's no question about that. I had some coaches looking but not saying, because I'm quite vocal with the yellow for yelling. So I don't think they were. I had a few good coaches, like we had some good challenging discussion when they were very technique oriented. And I think a lot of coaches will sort of go more to feel like, he's just coaching some girls who just want to play for fun. And I said, well, everybody wants to play for fun. And I guess the fortunate thing also in that sense that parents took it on and they could see that the girls loved what they were doing. And I think that was a real, I always talk to the parents and say, hey, this is what these girls want to do. We counting how many 3 passes they can do before they get the ball over. I said, I don't care if you win or lose. I just want to see you do more passes. How many times can you do a 3? And then they go, oh, now we can break it in the next set. We can do better. We can do better. But the parents bought into it. So I didn't have anyone that. I did have a situation where there was particularly one new girl and one quite dominant girl had some issues, and the mother got involved, and this went a little bit ugly. But I basically just pulled the girls aside and I say, hey, when you're all playing competitively, you all want to win, you all behave differently. Just consider how you are and consider how the others are. So, but there was only that parent, but I never told the parents how to behave. I just suggested that I would have to talk to all the girls, and I said this, and then I had the feedback from the parents, and that all the girls had gone home to tell the parents what I've been talking about, and they're all said great. So there always going to be difference, and of course in a group of 15, 16-year-old girls, it's always going to be some challenges to be had. So yeah, but I think overall the experiences for me has been fantastic. I think coaches sees that they're all enjoying themselves and they're all learning and they're all improving. The girls feel like they are improving because they set their own goals, and some set very high goals, some set lower, but that's okay. And they are all very inclusive and they are all very good friends. So it's going to be interesting now when we start again, because there's a new girl who knows somebody, and that's going to be interesting to see on how everybody sort of embrace her. I don't know her myself, so I don't know the parents. I don't know anything about them, but we needed some new players.
Hey, Ken.
Yep.
Have you seen Haiku yet? Haiku.
No.
Is
Yeah.
this?
Oh, hang on. Yeah, I heard.
Hey, it's a Japanese anime, and it's based on volleyball.
You told me about this actually some
it's
time ago. Actually, yes.
amazing, because
Yeah.
you forget so often that we see the cartoons and TV shows from America, you know, and they have a very different cultural spin. And then you're going to see how the Japanese look at sport, you know, because it's written by a Japanese guy, you know, and the characters are much more complex and there's much more trauma involved, you know, and it's such a beautifully illustrated series. So anyone in the group, it made me want to play volleyball. You know, Brendan was asking, and I was saying Pete was there as well. You know, this idea that when you're bringing someone to the game for the first time, you know, do they want to continue playing it or not? I think, as you showed, that initial spark, can you get them in love with the game, and you know, do they want to improve? And you know, it's what's in it for me. If I improve, it's going to be more fun because it's already so much fun, and the potential to have fun is there. And you know, I thought Pete was in the same space. I was considering, you know, where you're going in as a football development officer, can you get them to love this game, or you know, and let that motivate them to go forward, you know? But it has to be accessible, doesn't it? Like from your example, I can see that the girls there wasn't a barrier in the way, was there? And particularly you,
No,
you know,
no, but I think
the opposite of Joey. Joey was cursed with the other way around. If we compare the pair, yeah, she came from such an elite status that her identity was probably messed up as a coach. You know, she probably thought she had to do so much where you just thought it better start well. You know, Joey's thinking about the end already. You know.
Yeah, but I think my girls are not on the elite level either, so there was more of a very social context. Although it's interesting that one of the girls actually ending up representing the state team, so the level was good, and I had nothing to do with her skill level. And in fact, they all had their own everything to own themselves to their own skill level because they were the one that practiced. And there was very rarely they were asking me, how do you do something? And all I would say to them would be, if they miss something and you can see that they're using a dig instead of the overarm or something, you says, and I say, okay, what other options did you have? I should have done this. Cool, right? Good. You know the answers, so I don't have to rub it in. So like not having to be.
You make a great point there, because you mentioned actually, and I say that because you mentioned it. I think it was yourself or someone mentioned reviewing. You know, like questioning the players and getting them to review something. If you remember in the webinar, I think it might have been, or someone else raised that question.
Maybe somebody else. Yeah.
But you know, if you can't explicitly sort of say something, then you haven't conceptually got it yet. You know, so you might perceive something, but if you don't know what you should have done, or that there was another option, or then you can't really define it yet. You know, so that probably speaks to, you know, the power of questioning. If they can verbalize something, then they can really show you their understanding. So it's a useful way for you to gauge where they are, not so much for them to give instruction, but allow them to have to define, you know, their appreciation of the, you know, the skill, the timing, the moment.
I think also you don't have the same vantage points like they have. So, you know, it's easy. I mean, we know we are all armchairs expert when we're watching a football game on TV, right? So we know exactly, why did he shoot there? He should have passed it. We've all done it, right? And that's perhaps an issue when it comes to the parents, because they think they know more than what they do in that sense. But I think this is what makes so much sense when and I have had a lot of conversation with Reed Maltby. I don't know if you know of Racing Excellence. He works a lot with the US sailing and US soccer and US ice hockey and England, the rugby 7 and things like that. And so he's a sports psychologist, and he's also got a master's in early childhood learning. So he have a very good understanding. So I learned a lot of language from him, and I'm working on my own vocabulary and replacing words You don't compliment someone and say but afterwards and then start to say something else because you killed it. Right? And then this Socratic questioning and all of this sort of stuff. I mean, I don't have a rich history of coaching. I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is I have benched people because I thought we would come away with a win when they're 10-year-old. So I have been there, and I have been the one that's sort of directing, follow my lead, you know. And so I've been standing there. I've done it all. I'm quite embarrassed to say some of this stuff because I probably made some kids leave the sport because I wanted to win. I wanted to show the head coach that, hey, we won, we beat them. And that was purely my ego that was in there. So I have a reset. I think we all can learn.
I think that's a sort of default that all of us, is a default that all of us go to. You know, you're thrown into the deep end and you go on what experiences you've had. So you go on how you were coached as a kid, as your default, and it's only through time and education that we learn and we develop ourselves and evolve in a sense to what Ken's talking about now. But I think that's part of the process. You've got to see it first from the other side before you can sort of question that and really consider whether that is the best way. And it's then I think we begin to start thinking outside of the box. Interesting, while you were talking there, one of the things that came into my head was about coaching errors rather than mistakes. I think, again, as coaches, we're quick to, whenever we see a mistake, we'll go in and try and correct it. But if it's a mistake, it means that the person knows, the player knows that it's something that they've done wrong or wasn't quite the best answer, the best solution for that problem. But they do know what other solutions or better options. And if we focus on that, we're constantly hammering a negative. Whereas if we focus on the errors where they're actually doing something because they don't know the correct technique or whatever, I think it's a subtle distinction, but it's something that I've tried to be more aware of in my coaching, and it's something that sort of that becomes a discussion with other coaches about, are you actually coaching an error, or is it just a one-off? Is it, you know, or a coincidence? I remember somebody saying to me once, once is a one-off, twice is a coincidence, and 3 times is a habit. So in essence, saying that you wait for something to happen 3 times before you go in and try to coach it. But
I love that.
Interesting stuff.
Just to jump in there too, as if another way I've looked at it is, you know, how long can we wait to see if the kids can work it out themselves? So I remember in a game, and I was standing next to someone that said to me, Joey, aren't you going to actually stop it? Because the same thing has happened about 5 times. The goalkeeper gave it to the kid, you know, short on the right-hand side, and he got himself in a corner and he just kept giving the ball away. And it happened about 5 times in a row. And the guy next to me was like, Joey, aren't you going to stop and help him or, you know, help the others as to how to do it? And I'm like, let's just wait and see for a second. Let's just see if anything changes on their own. And it did. There was, you know, I'm not sure how many times it took, but it didn't need me to come in and say, you know, and give them the solution. It was hurting me because because obviously wanted to help the kid, but I was like, no, I'm going to wait and see what happens. Is this kid going to work it out for themselves? And he did actually change. He moved to a different area of the field to get the ball the next time. And then the game just opened up for him. And I was just like, oh, I love that. You know, because we can want to rush in
and but I'm wondering how long can we actually wait to do that. But I'd love to hear more as well, as if about your story where you're coaching. Or Kenny, did you have something?
Now, can I just ask? I want to ask you a question about that, because I know, and I've seen this so many times, is that the curriculum says play out from the back, and that's a classic one. Like you say, you're playing out, and then you got the teams that are pressing. So the kids, particularly the younger one, they don't have the firepower to actually do anything different. So they go there. But at the same time, their coaches have told them, you playing out from the back, that's your job. Don't do anything else. So you have already then told them exactly what to do. So end of story, you know?
I think there's a misconception. So for example, I like my teams to play out from the back, but there's a misconception about you've got to do it every time. The main question I will say to the goalkeeper and the defenders is, have a look at the numbers. Where have you got the advantage? Where's the space? So if they press on you, it means that they're leaving space behind them. So that's where the space is. So then you play there. And it's this constant cat and mouse, which takes place on the pitch. And once players recognize that, they can make decisions based on what's happening in the game. So it's not necessarily we're going to play out from the back and we're always going to play that way. No, we'll play depending on where the space is.
Yeah.
So Matty's just said, principles, not methods. Yeah.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Can you tell us a bit more about your environment that you're in, Asif, and how playful is it?
So I've been coaching for about 10 years, and been through various different organizations and club academies, development centers, and what have you. But I just felt that it wasn't right for the kids. It was more of it felt more like a business as opposed to football. So the last, I say 3-4 years, most of my stuff's been in local environments. So obviously before this all happened, I was coaching 7 days a week basically with different ages, different teams, and it was more about just giving kids an opportunity to play in an environment where they feel safe to try things, but then I'd be there to help them along the way if they needed it. So that's a lot of my sort of coaching is very broad and wide and varied nowadays. But also I work for the FA as a coach mentor, so that involves going to different clubs and different to different coaches, and just trying to get them to question what they're doing and why they're doing it. So that's really good. And my full-time job's working in a primary school, so there's a lot going on.
He held back on that the whole time. He works in a primary school. Wow, you're in a hot spot. You're in Afghanistan. You're in a war zone. Primary school. What a great place to be.
It feels like it. Like it. But what's interesting for me over the last few days, anyway, has been because over here, I don't know if you're aware. So from tomorrow, we're allowed to mix with up to 6 people, not from our own household. And just listening to coaches and on Twitter and stuff, and just in conversations and just talking about how they can't wait to get out there, and they're trying to work out ways of doing sessions, and there's quite a debate about, well, what's the rush? It's June. You wouldn't be training. Our season finishes end of April. You wouldn't be training at this time anyway. What's the rush to get out there? But again, I think it's that. I think Ken touched on it earlier, where adults sort of feel they have to impose their wisdom and their knowledge on these empty vessels, and we're scared of letting them play. So it would be interesting to see how that pans out over the next few days.
I'm going to jump in and say I know exactly what you're on about, because that's what I've been drawing right here is a whole lot of different things that I've been told. Tomorrow night is my first night back with an under-9s group up in Sutherland, and being told, oh, okay, now we have to do like maximum 9 players, and I'm trying to draw up different ways that I'm playing different games, and it's obviously non-contact. So I know exactly where you're coming from, mate.
Would you say, Pete, you'd rather not train at all? Do you think? That's what my question at the moment is: do we go with the restriction? Is restrictions better than, not coming together at all if it's not actually conducive to play?
Yeah,
what do the kids say?
I'm trying to work out how I can get a group of 7, 8, and 9-year-old kids to play with the concept of, there's no contact, so you can't be in too close of proximity, that you can't touch any of the equipment, you can't use your hands for any of the equipment, that there's so many kind of guidelines of it, how I'm going to try and create this sense of play where I've been given a 90-minute time slot with them. And that's exactly what I'm trying to draw up now while you guys have been having a chat. And I can see Matt's having a great old laugh about that one, because you know exactly what it's like.
That actually sounds like some pretty cool rules if you put that to the kids, like Ken just called out as well. What do the kids want to do? If you actually said, okay, guys, you know what? We can't touch anything. We've got to be 1.5 meters apart. This is the rules. Okay, what game are we going to play? And I'm sure they might actually come up with some interesting games themselves.
It's hard for the kids as well, because they are used to being in school now, at least over here. And I have a friend of mine, he's coaching, and he's not. They also have to have social distance. But then the kids go, and these are 12-year-olds. So say, well, we're playing around in school, so why can't we play around now? So it's another game that is a bit difficult for them to, okay, now we're going to train in the evening, which means that these are the rules or constraints. But in school, we can do it differently. So that's not easy for the kids to get their head around even.
It's a good point, Ken, because, I mean, Pete, the government regulations around social distancing don't actually apply for kids. So, in the school environment, the kids don't have to social distance because the transmission between kids is, the science is saying it's not that great. The teachers have to social distance from the children, but children and children they're not applicable to social distancing. So I don't understand somebody's take on that. Is that an instruction you've been given, or?
Yeah, it's pretty much they're the instructions being given by Football New South Wales, which have been sent down to all our associations, and then from the association to the different groups that I'm working with. So yeah, they kind of
same in Adelaide. Yeah.
Constraints-led approach. That's what it's called. Just get on with it.
Overly constraints-led approach.
Yeah. You only have 90 minutes.
Oh my goodness. Like that's going to hurt.
You are going to be very constrained.
But then so to balance out, so I've got a 90-minute session with an under 9s group, and then I have a 60-minute session with an under 15s group.
Who's calling how long you have to train? Like, do you really have a time limit you have to stick to?
Yeah, I have it based on the local association and their club.
Hey, I give you a free one. Hey, I used to do the Mariners development officer job, and I had to go to the schools and I guarantee you this, I did as much as I could before I started playing or doing anything, because as soon as you played football, they're only good for 15 minutes. They start to get tired and ratty. So because fatigue kicks in, you play 4v4. It's a conditioning game at the seniors level, and we're expecting kids to, keep up. Even just 20 minutes of 4v4 is exhausting for them. That's that other factor of being too constrained. Time, and number size and not being able to stop. But I used to have them all sit on the ground, and I say, it doesn't matter how fast you are, it just matters how fast you are. and I wait because see, maybe you're trying to figure it out too. And then they say, and then I try to give them an example, and I stand next to you and I say, we're going to have a race to the ball. And I say, are you ready, Pete? And what do you say?
Yes.
I already started running. I'm gone. I'm at the ball already. And they say, that's not fair. And I say, why not? Everyone is loving this, by the way. They say, why? I didn't say you had to wait. Huh? I just said, we're going to have a race. Are you ready? You said you were ready. What are you waiting for? You thought I was going to say go. You know, this is a kid. See, this is the problem, isn't it? We have had but you're supposed to say go. What are you talking about? This is football, man. So that's first lesson for them. I'll give you one more. They're all on the ground. Okay, we're going to start. I say, okay, but first I need to see how quick you are. Again, it's not how fast you are. It's just how fast you are. I love this one, JP. I say to the kids, okay, when I say go, the first one to stand up wins. Are you ready, set? And they all stand up. I say, wow, there's another lesson right there. You know, you went at the wrong time. Doesn't matter how fast you are because you didn't do it at the right time. So you're slow. Hey, another, hidden learning. But they like this. You can go on, you ham it up.
Yeah.
You get like Jerry Seinfeld because you see the same kids all the time, but you have the same act, so you know what works, what doesn't. Anyway, the next one I say, you have to wait till I say go. And I'm waiting now. Some kid will pick up on the fact that I just said it, and then someone will stand up and that brave soul I will highlight for all it's worth, I'll say, look at this kid. He's the fastest here because I said go and he's up. Yeah. And then I'll change the word. I'll say, get up when I say kick. And I'll say flick, trick, mick. And now they have to differentiate the word. And that's exactly what we're teaching them in the game as well. Differentiate, pick out your cues, what. Anyway, just because you have 90 minutes, there you go. That's at least an easy 10 for you.
Thank you very much, mate. Appreciate it.
Would you get the sack if you did free play, Pete, or multi-ball?
Oh, man, that's what I'm going to do.
Bust out the egg ball?
I'm admittedly going to play some 2v2 mini World Cup with different size footballs. I've got a tennis ball here. I've got a mini ball. I've got a size 3 and a size 5. I'm just going to vary up the games towards the end.
Can you video that?
I'll see what I can do.
I need that footage, son. That's gold.
Pete, is this going to be your first session back? Is it or?
It's going to be the first session back with this particular group of players. So Last week was my first week back with the team that I coach full time, which is a U17 team. I hate the concept of this being an academy team, but this is a team of players who didn't make it into their representative team, but they stay inside the representative banner because they are like the second team kind of style. Yeah.
So it's their first session back, is it?
Yes.
So how long have they been off?
They've been off. The last session that we did was week 2, and week 2 on my calendar was the 9th of March. That was the last time that we did a training session together.
So, personally, I would say football is probably even out of the question. You're not going to get any decent instructions or learning across.
Hey, wow.
Where's my yellow card?
Yeah, yellow card.
You know what I mean. I said you're not gonna get any across. I didn't say the players won't get anything. But as a coach, sorry, God.
No, I was just gonna say, mindful of the time, it'd be great to have to Danny what's happened, because we haven't heard enough from Danielle there, and what's her take on maybe tonight as a summary or how it might resonate with you. Yeah. Just if you're up to, I haven't heard it. It feels like maybe we've drowned you out, or see, no one, see, you didn't pass the ball to Danny, nobody. See, not enough street soccer. See, why not?
I'm doing all the observation here, and my observation tonight's been wild.
Like she wasn't there, Danielle Montessori.
No, I think it's been awesome. I mean, there's just so much that you can pull out from all the conversations at the moment. And I thought it was really interesting, your comment on that Japanese, was it anime? Haikyuu or something? So,
Haikyuu.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. And I was thinking about a movie that I love, and I've watched again recently. It's pretty mad, you know. It's Shaolin Soccer. I don't know how many of you have seen that movie, but when it comes to just like, obviously it's still high performance in its own way, but it's just so playful.
Who hasn't seen it? Who hasn't? Oh, Pete, have you seen it?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank God.
My soccer, was it?
Shaolin.
I see if you've seen it.
Shaolin Soccer.
Yeah.
Oh, great movie.
Yeah.
Brendan, you're on it.
Put it
Ken,
in
you
the,
have.
put it
you
in
have-
the chat, mate. Put it in the
I was
chat.
about. I'm
It's
going
a
to catch
GPL
myself,
movie
Ken, with the
night.
language.
Yeah,
Yeah.
GPL movie.
Your home play. Ken would have said homework. I'm saying home play.
The home play will.
Maybe I should pull up Pete at this time. Pete, you see, I say home play. Is to
Oh, yeah.
watch Shaolin Soccer.
I just finished your article about the play fighting.
Oh, the rats.
Don't start me tonight. That's I'm holding that one in at the moment. There's something fantastic. That's there's something worth it in there. Yeah.
All right, got it up. I'll have a look.
Watch it and see what learnings you can sort of divulge from it. I mean, there are some messages there which I watch it and I think, imagine if everyone could kind of play at that level of like spiritual freedom, you know?
And it doesn't have a great fit with this, you want to say, multi-sport aspect, you know, because that's what Kung Fu is about, isn't it? It's about taking this embodiment of like wanting, you know, being able to be skillful. I grew up on martial arts movies doing martial arts, and the superhero was always skillful in, you know, technique, I guess. And it was there, you know, the Chinese superhero is quite different maybe than the American. You know, the American has superpowers, you know, where in the Asian culture, they're sort of superior in skill, but also composure and stature and, you know, etiquette and manners. You know, you challenge me to a duel and it's, you know, it looks like they're just shaking hands. You know, it's quite a different cultural take, isn't it?
Was there anything else, Danny? Before we wrap up?
Not specifically. Just keep talking amongst yourselves and I'll just learn and absorb, and yeah, no, it's all good.
Okay, well, we might wrap it up, guys. That's really cool. Nice little intimate play group tonight. Thank you so much for contributing, and value you guys, how you're investing into GPL and bringing it to life and helping shape it, and just it's so fun. I just love that. Like, even with Ken saying that, you know, with the coaching, it just brings less stress, really. That's one of the biggest benefits, and that's what I love about GPL, is just that sense of fun and playfulness. I don't feel like we can go wrong with that if we always have that as at the heart of what we do. So anyway, unless anyone else has anything else to say, I'll say farewell for now, and see you on the Facebook group or wherever else we shall meet up.
Just a note on that, it's been quite busy, the Facebook group. That's really healthy and engaging. I found this week there was plenty of a lot of variation, which was good as well, you know, from quotes to ideas to references to some lives. And I appreciate, Ken, you're doing those ones as well. Even if you don't reply to them, they're such thought-provoking pieces, all of them at some level.
Yeah, I find it difficult sometimes, because sometimes I do it in the car and I just never get the. I need to get my head around it to actually really. I'll do another one. I may do one. I got a few thinking here. I may do one on how we play, or how we grown up play. I don't know if you can identify all the times that you actually play.
That's a good thought.
Joey, there's again, probably not for now, it's getting a bit late, but there were probably three things that would be interesting to hear more about him, and maybe it's something for it is something for next week potentially, depending on what you got planned. But Ken mentioned something earlier which I thought was quite interesting. He started to talk about technique versus play. and probably it'd be interesting to hear the arguments around technique versus play. Because he had some experience with coaches, and it sounds like there was some conversation around technique versus the coaching that he was doing, or the play he was doing. The other thing was, it'd be fantastic to hear Pete's experience after tomorrow, if he shares that next week. And the third one, I'm just going through. The thing that you put in the Facebook group, I think it was in the last 24 hours or so, around creative genius. And be interesting to hear people's thoughts around what that actually means, creative genius to them. Because you said that embodies GPL. So just be interesting. Again, not now. Again, it's late. I'm sure we've all got a few things to do, but yeah.
I almost started. I was ready.
don't start, mate. Don't
your time.
You be patient and just, chew the fat until next week. But again, really interesting. I mean, it's just, that's around mindset and that creative genius, what that actually means to people, and maybe even examples of what they see during the next week with their engagement with, their opportunities in play and what they're doing. That'd be quite interesting to hear. Anyway,
it's going to be an interesting week, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, because people are back, right? There's some movement in the camps and stuff. So, like Pete starting tomorrow, just having those thoughts in your head. Where do we see creative genius happening? How did that get facilitated for that to happen? Again, and understanding technique versus play. Again, Ken's had some experience. I'm sure everyone's had some experience about those sort of arguments around technique versus play. Because that's really, at the end of the day, for my limited experience, that's really what this group's sort of arguing the toss about. The technique-driven, coaching-driven style is what's prevalent, and we're saying, well, okay, what are how do you overcome those arguments? You need to understand what the focus is of those arguments to be able to then combat them is probably the wrong word, but to embrace them, understand those fears that people have, and then you can work through them.
It's to shift the paradigm, isn't it? Like,
absolutely.
Just to finish it, to shift the paradigm, you mentioned, like, how do you make change happen? And a big part of that is just changing the paradigm. That's the quickest way to change, is to just change someone, the way they look at something. And if you can do that, and I think play is not seen for what it is, and the paradigm shift is where it's going to be most, where you're going to get most leverage in getting change. Because if you knew what play was, you would want it, given that, and that's not what's happening. We're denying it, we're distorting it, we're limiting it. It's a deficit, and yet it carries with it. I'll put it to you that the deficit in play leads to depression, because we need play for biological purposes as well, so it's really, there's a lot in it, I think, and continue on it as you go. But I think that's a great question. And that article was what really rose that as an issue, because you just saw that dramatic drop off in creativity. Just reading that article was quite scary to think that where did all that creativity go? And I think we all know it intuitively. That's the thing that I put up there, as if, like, he sensed that he was doing the wrong thing. I don't mean it like that. You sensed that it wasn't what you wanted to see, to embody, like it just wasn't football to you, the example you gave. And I thought that resonated to me, because we only get a sense first, and then we perceive, we pay attention to the sense, and then you have to be able to conceptualize it after that, which is to make, integrate it and say, well, I made that change because of this belief. You can't, and we're all at different levels, but as long as you get the sense, you're on the right track. Like Ken said, he limited experience, but as long as the sense is intuitive, you're really going to find your way along a coaching path fine, because the resources are developing all the time. Like Ken said, you're not as easily led astray as maybe once upon a time, where information was much more restrictive. If you want to educate yourself now, it's the best time in history. It's only going to get better.
If podcasts and everything I read would give me the degree, I would have had a degree now. But I just want to finish off with one more. Yeah, sorry. I just want to finish off with
a degree.
So depending on to what degree. But what I wanted, just one thing to perhaps have that on the back of your mind when you think about it, because I was interviewing a professional player who's been playing 20 years in Serie A, and he was the technical coach for the club my son is doing, and where I do a lot of yellow for yelling work. So he said, football is 70% in your mind. So I'm asking coaches, so how much time do you spend on your training on this? And pretty much everybody knows the answer, because it's all about skill acquisition or skill adaptation or whatever it is. But what is here? How do we do that?
Totally agree.
And that's the part I'm trying to now put that into my presentation, is to start, if football is 70% here and 30% the rest, why do you spend 100% of your training on your feet, and you're running in position? What are you doing up here? So it could be a segue into play and GPL. Yeah?
That's where my big focus is at the moment. So again, without going into it, I think it's the right direction to take is to get that definition, particularly in this community, because that's where the leverage is going to be. Because if it is valuable and people see it as valuable, then I think that's shifting that focus. You know, there's things that you just don't know about it, like you said. And I think it's there to be had for sure, but collectively.
Nice. Okay, guys. Well, it's great.
Yeah, I gotta go.
Still talking. Yeah, continue it on to the Facebook group if you like. Just add your thoughts in your little videos and posts and everything. It's great. Yeah. Thank
what
you,
a pleasure,
everybody.
a small group. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah, fantastic discussion.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Good
Thank you,
night.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Well done.
Night.